At this point, you should understand that phonemes, that is, the mental representation of sounds, aren't always pronounced as intended. And sometimes the way they are pronounced is subject to very regular rules. And in linguistics, we have a way of representing these rules in shorthand notation. We saw in the previous slide that, for example, English, we have this single phoneme, and sometimes it's pronounced as an aspirated phoneme when it occurs here, and sometimes it's pronounced as an unaspirated phoneme. Well, this slide is just another way of saying the exact same thing, using a sort of linguistic shorthand. The first element that we see there is the phoneme. We see the P-IPA symbol surrounded by two slashes, which means it's the mental representation, it's the phoneme. It becomes, that's what the arrow means, this allophone, and we know it's an allophone because it has brackets around it instead of the slashes. That is the way it's actually articulated, the way it's spoken. That slash means when it occurs. And this is the phonetic environment. And in this particular phonetic environment, we have the blank, and we have the sigma, which means a syllable boundary. A boundary means breaking point between two syllables. And we know that this syllable is going to be a stressed syllable, so a stressed syllable boundary. And this is a little bit confusing. You might think that this means it comes after the syllable. Well, that's not true. It comes after the syllable boundary, which means it comes at the beginning of the syllable. This is a syllable boundary, not a syllable, but a syllable boundary. That is the line of demarcation, the point at which the previous syllable ends and the new syllable begins. So the beginning of the syllable, here's the sound, right at the beginning of the syllable, and it's also a stressed syllable. So the P phoneme becomes the aspirated P allophone when it occurs right after a syllable boundary, a stressed syllable boundary, which means basically at the beginning of a stressed syllable. And this is a case of predictable variation. And we have some other linguistic symbols. These are the only ones we're going to use in this class. This means word boundary. And so if you want to indicate a sound at the beginning of a word, it would come after this symbol, because this would mean the beginning of the word, and then whatever comes here would be the beginning of the word. And if it comes before this symbol, then it simply means at the end of the word. It comes before a word boundary, means at the end of the word. It comes after a word boundary, means the beginning of the word. Same thing with syllable boundary. If it comes here, if you put the little blank line here, right before this sigma, it means before the syllable boundary, in other words, at the end of a syllable. And if you put it here, it means after the syllable boundary, which means the beginning of the syllable. This is the stress marker. A capital V, it's not an IPA symbol. A capital V just means vowel. A capital C means consonant. And these are individual sounds, and of course they should be in IPA and not just English alphabet. So here's a quiz for you. What does this rule mean? And I've put the little cheat sheet, these little symbols here. So I have a phoneme here, I have an allophone here, and I have an environment here. Can you go back a couple of slides and apply this to this example? Go ahead and pause the video at this point while you work this out. Here's another problem for you. Can you state this rule in plain English? In other words, something becomes something when it occurs somewhere. You should push pause here and try and figure out this problem. Here's yet another problem. You should push pause here and try and figure this one out. So the bottom line is that there isn't always a perfect correspondence between what we think and what we say. Some sounds get altered in predictable ways as they are called into action. That's the end of the first part of the unit on phonology. In the next class, we're going to have a little bit of a quiz, and in that quiz, I'm going to tell you exactly the questions I will ask. I will ask you to state this rule in plain English. I will ask you to state this rule in plain English. And I will ask you to state this rule in plain English. Additionally, I will ask you to define these terms here: predictable variation, complementary distribution, unnoticed sound variation, unpredictable variation, non-complementary distribution, and noticed sound variation.